You want to watch cartoons? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Animation Historia. I'm your host, Hunter, and with me today is my co host, Heather.
Hey, what's up?
And welcome to the first episode. And in this, we're mainly going to discuss our love and passion for animation. So, I will actually start off on this. I've always loved animation. I grew up with it, and it really was the one thing that was constant in my life. I guess I'll tell you about myself a little bit. I've always grown up with cartoons, and I've just always found cartoons fascinating. The way that you can express so many different emotions with just a simple square is just absolutely fascinating. And like in Fantasia 2000, the Beethoven's Fifth Movement, all they use to express so many various emotions is triangles. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And that's why I want to do this. I want to talk about the history of animation and why we need to keep animation going and why we need to catalog it and keep this whole thing from being forgotten. Because we've already lost so many pieces of animation. We've lost like the very first full-length animated feature. We've lost a lot of different very important pieces of animation. And so in this case I want to try to keep as much of it as live as I possibly can.
Animation's been I came into it a little bit late. I definitely was interested in it as a kid and it always fascinated me, but I didn't really get my head in the game until I was in high school. I kind of started with Adobe Flash and 3ds Max, and I touched a little bit on Maya, and I knew how to animate. Basically, I'm much better animator than I am a modeler. I will be totally honest. I can't like make the actual character very well, but that's a little besides the point. I kind of came into it around the time of RWBY. It's Ruby. It's from Rooster Teeth. They started making just a really simple cartoon, and it's done with Poser Pro. It's a simple, cheap program, and it kind of fascinated me the way that all of like these new people who weren't necessarily well versed in animation, how they were actually just going in and making that whole new thing. And that really inspired me. I think that we're really in an age of young, new creators, and I personally am really excited to hopefully one day be one of them. But for now, I'm more than content to just discuss some of my favorites.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say that right now we're in the apex of independent animation. I'm sure you'll agree on this. But
I
we're
do.
at this point in the history of animation where anyone can put cartoons out and hundreds, maybe even thousands or millions of people will look at it. Look at Harry Partridge. Look at Rooster Teeth. Look at all these different major independent artists who aren't connected to a major brand doing their own thing. And that's a big thing is that we can do so much now. We have the ability for anyone to animate with really easy, cheap software. Anyone could get into animation. So that's why nowadays it's more we're looking at the independence rather than the big studios, is because that's where the innovation is going to be coming from these days, not from the big studios like DHX, Hasbro,
Ghibli.
Ghibli, all the anime studios. We're going to be seeing a lot more independently created anime, independently created anything. Like all around the world, we're going to be seeing a whole lot more animation.
And I hope so. I mean, I'm kind of excited for more things like you're probably aware of Cartoon Hangover, right? They kind of split off from Cartoon Network and they're doing their own thing with Bravest Warriors and Being Puppy Cat and stuff.
Yep.
I'm hoping to see more of that because I like that whole like rebellion against larger studios that you were just talking about.
Yeah, the cartoon hangover is connected to Channel Frederator, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
just know that they made their. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, no, no, no. No, no, you're right. They made their own cartoons that became wildly popular. Roost, uh, Bravest Warrior has its own like major comic book that's still going, I believe. Bee and
Hmm.
Puppycat is absolutely adorable.
Yeah, and their shorts are really great, and I like seeing them a little bit more unbridled and I guess like having that freedom and creativity. But I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, 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 it's fine. We'll get more into Channel Frederator because I do have someone that works with Channel Frederator, and they do have a lot to say about it. I'm
Oh,
gonna let
very
that
cool.
come in later. Not this episode. That's gonna probably be much later. But for now, I want to. For me personally, the earliest time I've ever created an animation was in fourth grade. We were just getting our computers, you know, the Apple IIes, all the old 386, 486s, and we had a very basic animation program. Actually, I think it was third grade because we had Kid Pix. Do you remember Kid Pix on the Mac?
No, I'm not. I'm not really familiar with that.
Oh well, Kid Pix is like this kids show thing. A kids show. It's a kids program that gives you the ability to do simple art, simple music, simple animation. And that was really the first time I actually created animation was with KidPix. In fourth and fifth grade, we had like other ones that were a little more advanced. And then in 10th grade, I believe it was, I got into an actual like computer graphics um, group or
Hmm.
class, and there we did some really, really rudimentary puppetry animation. Now,
What's
puppetry
that?
animation, to explain for people listening, is when you have a image, like let's just say Donald Duck, and you have all these different parts to Donald, but you can remove said parts like the appendages, the facial expressions, and everything, and switch it around to get various animation or various facial patterns. And then you can move the character around on the parts of the screen, take a screenshot, and then you put it together to form a very basic animation. Now, on proper puppetry animation, there's thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of different versions of the face to give the whole wide spectrum of movement and everything. And so, but this, we just had like 3 frames per, or 3 keyframes, and we just kind of moved it around, making some basic animation. It was fun.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. I while you were talking, I was reminded of I took a like I was talking about, I took an animation class in high school, and before we were even allowed to touch the actual software, the teacher made sure that even if you weren't a good artist, that you could like draw the different like in between frames of like squish and stretch of like an emotion or of like a ball rolling down something or like bouncing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to get in there and actually study the essential parts of animation because there's so much besides the actual like walking cycles, besides the actual like someone coming into the frame that goes into making it somewhat lifelike. Like if you were to see Donald Duck, you mentioned, if you were to see him walk without any of the squish and stretch, without any of that, it looks really bizarre and it's just like unsettling in a way. So I was reminded of that kind of deeper study of trying to figure it out.
Definitely. And we can go on the fact that there's a book that pretty much any independent animator uses. Well, this is what Richard Williams, the guy who did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in his book, The Animator Survival Kit, said about timing and spacing. And that's kind of how you get that really realistic, well, not realistic, but real natural
Natural
movement.
movement.
That's the word I was thinking of. The bouncing ball says it all. The old bouncing ball example is often used because it shows so many different aspects of an animation. Uh, and when it hits the boinks, and that's the timing, the impacts, where the ball is hitting the ground, that's the timing of the action. The rhythm of where things happen and where the accents or beats or hits happen. And the spacing is going to be continuously shrinking, and if you just have the ball move
Hmm.
from 1 to 20 every single bounce, it's not going to look realistic at all. So instead, the original one in his example goes from 1 to 20, and then it goes from 1 to 16, then 1 to 13, then 1 to 10. You keep removing frames or a number of balls per animation to make it look more realistic.
Yeah, to mimic natural movement. I
Mm-hmm.
think what's I think what's really interesting, I'm not uh terribly familiar with that particular book, but is so much the way that animation itself mimics the writing that goes into making a cartoon or making an anime or whatever animated series you want to talk about. For example, the way that you were talking about like timing and making it a natural progression, a lot of shows fall very flat or they go just a little too long. They overstay their welcome in a way. And I think that as an animator, when you learn timing, when you learn natural movement, it really lends itself to writing the actual story a lot better, especially like as a producer.
Oh, definitely. And there's a lot that's going to go into it. And we're going to have plenty of time to go into the skills needed behind animation, the need for understanding the basics of animation. We have a whole lot to deal with that. For right now, let's go into something a little bit less, I don't want to say intelligent, but something a little less academic. So tell me, Heather, what's your favorite cartoon?
It's a tough one. I'm really like close to saying something kind of modern, and I hope I don't catch a whole lot of flack for this, but the original Teen Titans, not Teen Titans Go, but the Teen Titans cartoon that came out, I think early 2000s, that probably is up there on my list of favorites.
And I could see that. A lot of people really find that one fascinating with its almost anime style. It was a very good combination of all these different styles put together. The drama of anime, the comic book stories, all those different parts, and the definitely anime inspired art.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that something that it did very well, um, and I could talk about the design of it all day, so I'll try not to eat up too much of the time, but one thing that it did very well was blending those styles, as you mentioned, that Western comic book style and that anime, like the way that the eyes are drawn, the way that they transition into chibis every so often, that very pointedly anime style. I like the way that they did that because it added a lot of depth, I think, to the characters because you didn't just see them as, you know, 2D in the way that you would see a lot of Western cartoons. You kind of see them as just kind of blah characters, but they display excitement in a different way in more Western cartoons. And I think that it added like this whole other layer to each character when you see them um, over exaggerated in certain ways. And when it comes to, for example, Raven's powers, when you see her meditating and then like she freaks out for a second because somebody interrupted her, you see like the vein come up and then you see her like maybe like shrink a little bit into like more of like a chibi form or something. But you can see the irritation rather than just seeing like the eyebrows furrow, and it just adds a lot, I thought. So it's one of my favorite cartoons because of the way that they made it so expressive.
And I could definitely agree with that, that it was a really good one. For me, probably one of my favorites is going to be, and everyone says this, but whatever,
Do
Animaniacs.
it. Animaniacs?
Yes. The adult comedy, rather the combination of adult comedy, comedy that children can enjoy, and just comedy that families in general can all get behind. It's just a really funny, very solidly built cartoon. I want to say Steven Spielberg did an excellent job during this era with his animation projects, from Tiny Toon Adventures up to Historia, with like um, Freakazoid, Animaniacs, all these different titles put together. he did a really good job with this, and I feel that his whole like animation era really shows how good cartoons can be as in terms of a form of comedy, like sketch comedy and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I'd never thought about cartoons as comedy, which is interesting because they're supposed to be like caricatures of real people, but the way that cartoons approach comedy is very unique in the sense that it can be, and I'm not very familiar with Animaniacs, but it can be allegorical to an actual situation, and that's why you see so many like kids cartoons having like a very straightforward moral, and it's like, oh, well, stealing is bad or whatever the actual moral of the story is. But when it's comedy, it's got this whole other layer where, because you're seeing it from characters who are supposed to represent either stereotypes or like stock characters, you see it from an outsider's perspective and it's funny to you, but you may actually be doing those very same things. And I think that it's funny in that way because you kind of see what I guess I would call dramatic irony.
So, what's another one you enjoy?
I'm gonna probably stick with the modern ones for now. I just finished Adventure Time.
Ah, yes, Adventure Time. I really haven't gotten into Adventure Time.
It's
I know
pretty
it's good.
interesting.
I know it's good and everything. It's just at my point in life, it's just like I've got so much other stuff to watch that I really want to get into it, but I just am like I could watch that, or I could watch a Studio Ghibli animation.
I feel you. I was definitely like that at first with Adventure Time because it's like it just kind of seemed like that lull random, oh, look at me, so quirky, super technicolor animation to me. It just seemed a little ridiculous, but the more into it that I got, the more I had an appreciation for how truly difficult it would be to animate like 95% of the characters. And it's interesting that like some of the characters that are less, I guess, less animate, for lack of a better phrase, tend to be the villains, and that's pretty interesting to me. But I definitely recommend, like, if you have the time, give it a shot. Maybe don't start with the first season, but it's interesting. It's a good study.
Mm-hmm. I feel you, and I understand really. For me, my one of the favorite movies that I've ever watched, and I remember this from my childhood, and I remembered how much I loved it. Twice Upon a Time. It came out in 1982, I want to say. I don't have the
Oh,
exact year for me. And it was actually one of the few non Star Wars related animated films Lucas Arts was connected to, or
oh,
Lucasfilms rather. And the thing about it, and this is the fascinating thing about it, and it has its whole like backstory behind it that could take up its entire episode because there's so much drama behind it. But there's actually two versions of the movie. There's a kid-friendly version that you used to see occasionally on Cartoon Network. That was released on VHS a long time ago. You had that version, but then HBO released an adult version. And the reason why they have two different versions is because a lot of these people that did work in this are stand-up comedians. Like they were just doing not a stand-up routine. They had a
but they
plot and
had that
everything, but they
they had the dark
improvised a
humor.
lot. So like you'd hear in the adult version a lot of like shit, damn, and all those curse words that I should probably censor, but screw it. And then you would have in the same version or the kid-friendly version none of that. You wouldn't have them cursing, but you would have like Lorenzo Music. Do you remember Lorenzo Music's voice? The voice of Garfield from back in the day?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I haven't thought about that in years.
Yeah, that's the guy that did Ralph, the all-purpose animal in this show.
Oh
And,
wow.
Yeah, and he knocked it out of the ballpark. His deadpan voice is just so great. And the way they talk, it's not natural, but it's in a way that's really, really funny.
No, I was just gonna jump in and add that the whole deadpan voice thing. I had a teacher mention to me once that understatement is one of the cheapest and easiest ways to make something funny. And I just remembered that about Garfield, and it just makes me, I don't know, it just kind of gave me that nostalgia for a second.
It gives you nostalgia for hating Mondays and liking lasagna.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the two jokes that he always freaking does. Anyways, a little bit more about this show. So, I'm going to be the main talker in this. I'm going to do the majority of the animation history. I'm going to talk about whatever topic is going to be that week. Heather, my co-host, is actually going to have her own segment where she talks about various things related to the topic at hand. So she's going to have her own segment. I'm going to do the majority, but we won't necessarily always be on the same show together.
Yeah, keep the rotation fresh.
Yeah, definitely. And mostly her segment's going to be separate from mine, so blah, 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 all that fun stuff. So, anyways, do you have any other favorite cartoons?
I don't know how far we can get into anime, but
this is the world of animation. Whatever we talk about is going to be what we talk about. This isn't going to be purely anime, but definitely anime has a major influence on the world of animation, and so it is very important. Because, like, for example, Osamu Tezuka was actually, or you know who he is, right? The guy who created familiar. Astro Boy?
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, he was actually, he actually had communication with Walt Disney. They were going back and forth about, like, maybe bringing over Astro Boy through Disney.
Wow.
So
and that didn't come to pass, right?
Yeah, that didn't come to pass, but they remained close friends because Walt Disney actually loved Astro Boy. He loved the animation that Osamu Tezuka was doing. And Osamu Tezuka, of course, liked it, Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, so anime certainly has its place in a conversation about cartoons, and I know a lot of people will argue that they're wildly different, but I don't know about that. One of my favorite cartoons, I would definitely call it, Death Note and Kanan are both like right up there, and if you're a lot of people are very familiar with Death Note, so I won't really touch on that too much, but Kanan is about a synesthetic girl who's an agent in an organization, and it's a lot of like fighting and gunfire, but with that added element of this neurological condition called synesthesia, which is a real condition where you have the blending or the union of the senses. And it's just a beautifully done anime. Like, as far as visual aesthetics, everything that you can think of for like just eye candy, it's totally there.
And that was done by Key, if I remember right, who also did the series Angel Beats, another one of theirs. And Kanan, the one you were talking about, was actually based off of a visual novel they did a long time ago.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Kanan.
Wait, okay, so it's like it was a graphic novel and then it was
a visual
anime,
novel.
Not like
it's like one of those choose your own adventure games.
Oh, okay.
So they did that, and then they also had Clannad or something like that. But they did a lot of like ones, and if I remember right, Kanan was done by Key Animation or Key Studio or something like that.
I think that might be right.
Yeah. But yeah, they're a major studio, and they obviously started off making visual novels and then moved into animation. But their animation has been generally fairly good and highly dramatic for what it was. For me, another one I really like, if we're getting to anime, Akira. Let me just be the one that lists everyone's favorites things.
Well, then they'll like you. It's cool.
Yes, everyone will give me money.
You can donate to our Patreon at...
if I ever get around to making it.
Yeah, but you were talking about Akira, and I think that definitely has its place.
It's one of the I want to say it's one of the deepest anime out there. If you can rewatch it and watch it again, and you'll find something new inside of there that you didn't notice before. Like you might have not noticed the lady who was chanting Buddhist mantra in one scene riding down the street. That was an actual character, major character from the manga, who didn't get a part in the main story of the movie. So they just threw her in as a side note, and there you have her. In fact, the Akira movie didn't go through the entire story of Akira. There was a hell of a lot more after the explosion.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, how am I spoiling alerting?
No, you're not. It's old as the hills.
I was gonna say it's old enough. If you haven't watched it, you really should get around to watching it. It's like Star Wars, which I haven't
crawl
watched.
Crawl out from under your rock. I wonder, how do you consider? I don't know if it really fits the format of your podcast, but I was wondering about CGI and animation in live action stuff.
That's definitely an important part, and we'll eventually get into it. But that has basically its own place and its own like story and backstory to it. So we'll save that until we get into specifically that stuff.
Okay.
Because that is, and I'm going to say, even though this is more like animation, CGI inside of live action has been important. And that is its own topic. And I'm going to get into it eventually. But that's actually its own can of worms. And that takes a lot of different types of, I want to say, studies and disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
But for this purposes, right now, we're discussing purely modern animation. Like cartoons, animated movies, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, speaking of animated movies, did you hear that Illumination is making a, basically, I want to say Zootopia knockoff?
I did not. By the way, I am totally freaked out by, like, anthropomorphized animals, so I did not see Zootopia just going into this conversation, but I want to hear about this knockoff.
It's a knockoff of Zootopia and American Idol. That's it. I want to say right now that I'm going to be doing a lot of different stuff. I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to try to get interviews with various people inside of animation going. Maybe mix it in here somewhere. We're pretty much going to watch cartoons, talk about their history, talk and deconstruct it for you.
Yeah,
there's a lot of
maybe
interesting
make some
stuff.
Cartoons.
Maybe, who knows? I suck at art, but hell, I'll be willing to help. I'll be the idea guy.
Oh, perfect, yeah. Do all my writing. That way I can just, like, focus on animating.
Speaking of animating, my fiance's actually going into animation.
Oh, that's really cool. What does she work with right now?
She's right now working towards a 3D animation degree, so that's her. That's going to be her focus. She really wants to get into 3D rather than 2D.
That's interesting. I'm kind of the other side of the coin there.
Mm-hmm. And they're both really interesting topics. With 3D, we can go into the backstory of Pixar, the backstory of Steve Jobs, because he's the guy that created Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can go into, like, I remember this one, like, VHS from way back when I was a little kid. We would go to the library and I would always pick this out. But it was a short little movie about this guy detective, basically parodying noir. And we'd always get that along with a VHS about computer animation, which basically had a bunch of, like, computer animated scenes. But this guy would go into discussing how, like, comics and cartoons are made and how they work. And I just always found that fascinating. And I don't know the name of this movie, and I wish I did because I would love to watch it again. So that's going to be where we head. We're just going to be basically talking about cartoons, talking about our love of cartoons, and really getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I could probably talk for a while on a bunch of, like, different cartoons and what they mean, and some cartoons that do really, really good symbolism and amazing commentaries on social issues. And I know that that's going to be another episode. So for this one, it's kind of going to be like touch and go with all of those little things. For this particular one, though, I do want to bring up, since we are kind of hitting on those modern cartoons, I wanted to bring up Gravity Falls. And have you seen Gravity Falls?
I think I've seen one episode of it. Like I said, it's kind of hard for me to get into like the modern cartoons these days, but I definitely saw the skill and art of it.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention, my fiance really wants me to watch through Steven Universe, and it's just I can only watch so many episodes of that before I'm like, ah, I can't.
It does.
It is tiring.
It definitely gets pretty tiring. Like there's a lot of like overly jubilant characters, and it's very dramatic, and it does get a little too saccharine for my taste occasionally, which I think is kind of like why I like Gravity Falls. It's kind of like a palate cleanser from Steven Universe, which I love and I could talk about ad nauseum, but the way that Gravity Falls kind of approaches both like social issues and the way that they get straight to that moral is pretty fantastic, and at least I think. And if you haven't seen the intro for it, the animation that they do for a time lapse of a forest, it's amazing that you see like the shadows like twitching just so, and it's totally like unnecessary. Like you don't need to put that in there, but it was such an amazing touch that had to be difficult to actually do, and you can see the light changing, and it's just absolutely beautiful, and the whole show is very, very pretty as far as aesthetics go.
Mm-hmm. And I liked what I saw of it, and like I said, I really want to get into it, but I'm one of those people that also like to watch cartoons and these things that are really popular after the popularity dies down, because that gives me a chance to actually watch it without any sort of biasness to it.
I definitely agree with that. It's like kind of seeing like a movie on opening day. It's like, oh yeah, you see it first, but it's less special. Makes sense.
Well, that's kind of, I'm going to say, a little bit different because no one's spoiling it for you.
Yeah.
You see it on the opening night, and guess what? No one is going to be spoiling the story or talking about how amazing it is. Whereas if you get into it like, if you get into a series 1 year after it starts, everyone's going to be talking about that first season that you missed. And it just gets kind of grating on that because you want to watch it, but you don't want to really get involved with these people because you want to experience it on your own. Or at least experience how they experienced it. So anyways, our next episode is actually going to be a topic that I've really, really gotten into recently. And I love reading about. It's going to be Scooby-Doo and his clones.
Wait, what?
Scooby-Doo and his clones.
I mean, look, I know you're the plan guy, so I'm gonna like save my my skepticism, but I don't remember that episode.
Oh, well, let me tell you about Scooby-Doo and his clones. Back in when Scooby-Doo first came out, he was wildly popular, as I'm sure you figured out. Well, Hanna-Barbera wanted to continue the profits, so you know what they did?
No.
They made a ton of other cartoons basically aping the same plot.
For sure. And speaking of which, I think it is also our time, so insert clever sign-off here.
Yes, and we will see you next time on Animation Historia.